Joining me on this episode of the Neil Wilkins Podcast, I'm delighted to welcome Mickie Kennedy, who's the founder of eReleases. Now, Mickie has many followers, many interactions, and a huge wealth of experience, and is not just a business leader. He's not just a mentor. He is an inspiration to many entrepreneurs, and also he's a poet. So I think we're going to find out a little bit more about that as we get into the conversation. So welcome to the show, Mickie.
Thanks for having me.
I mean, what a lovely mixture of things. I mean, it's all about communication, isn't it?
It is. Communication is one of those things that is fundamental. And I find that if you have really good communication skills, you can almost go into any type of skill set or business and just learn from there.
I want to obviously come on to, for the audience, the whole kind of essence of e-releases and the importance of, press and media coverage and communications within the whole marketing mix for a business. But I want to start actually out with the really interesting, I guess, hook or conversation piece, which is the poetry. Tell me a little bit more.
So I've always been a writer. And then when I went to college, I really fell in love with writing poetry. And as a result, I pursued a Master's of Fine Arts in Creative Writing with an emphasis in poetry. It was a 3-year program after my undergraduate degree. And to be honest, my career plan was to wait tables and write poetry the rest of my life. And so I graduated about 27 years ago. And that summer, I did wait tables and I discovered something. I discovered that standing on concrete for 10-hour shifts is really hard on your knees and back. And at the end of 3 months, I was just like, physically, I felt like I was 80. And I never got stronger. At least I don't think I did. And I just felt so psychologically wasted at the end of all my shifts that I wasn't reading or writing. So I felt like I was going to pivot to a safe office job. And of course, this was before pivoting was a thing. And I got hired at a telecom research startup as employee number 3. And they saw that I had writing as a background and they wanted me to write press releases and send them out to the media via fax, because that's how we did it back then. And so I did it at first and nothing really happened. And I really sort of made it my mission to figure out what I was doing wrong. And I realized that I was just trying to expose some of our data that I thought was interesting to the media, but I wasn't explaining why it was interesting. And I realized that the media really wanted that story behind the data. So, for example, in the Caribbean countries, inbound and outbound traffic to the US, there was one country that was much bigger than all the rest. It might have been bigger than all of them combined. And so I explored why and found out that it was the call center for 1-900 numbers at the time, which were very popular, where you'd pick up the phone and call 1-900 something and you'd speak to someone who'd give you your horoscope, maybe recorded, or for a little bit more, a minute, you would call and speak to someone live, get advice, or, everything from pet advice to love advice and everything in between. So I talked about that in a press release and used the data as an introduction to that subject. And that got picked up by The Economist, Financial Times, Washington Post, Wall Street Journal, and 3 telecom trade publications. And so, wow, it's like, I think I'm figuring this out. And so I did subsequent releases and we routinely got picked up. Probably not as much as that first one, but I really realized that journalists were interested in a story and they wanted a story arc so that whatever you felt was interesting, like we felt the data was the interesting part, you've got to put it in context and you've got to share it in a way that follows a story arc, because journalists like to be storytellers. They know that their audience engages with the story. So even if it's a small article, it tells a story and it's not just here's data points. And so that's sort of what gave me the impetus to want to communicate press releases to the media. And I saw it as a huge opportunity for this very small business. And I felt like, wow, I could really do this potentially for other people. And almost at the same time, I started to get calls from journalists saying, hey, instead of faxing in the future, could you email it to me? And, if you've ever programmed a fax machine with 100 numbers, you know that email is a lot easier and better than faxing. So I just started networking with journalists and building my little Rolodex. And initially, I was going to be technology. And what I found is, as I'm networking with technology journalists, all of a sudden they're not technology journalists anymore. They're like, oh, I cover, the publishing industry now, or the transportation industry. And I was like, okay, I'm just going to put everybody in the database. And so I guess about a year or so later, I had 10,000 journalists in my database, all of them saying I could send them releases on behalf of clients. And that's when I launched eReleases. And I was just a matchmaker, sending releases to these journalists on behalf of my clients. And then I guess maybe 15 years ago, PR Newswire reached out to us. Here in the US, they're the oldest and largest newswire press releases. There's really a duopoly here, Business Wire and PR Newswire. And they liked what we were doing and wanted to find a way to support us. And they had suggested maybe giving a local city or state distribution to us at a reasonable price. And I really pushed back and said that, these guys, small businesses, deserve a national distribution. I knew at the time that they charge like $1,600 to move a 600-word press release over the wire. And my clients were just paying a few $100s. But eventually they agreed with me. And we also sort of realized that they have an overnight editorial team that doesn't do very much. They have to be there in case there's breaking news or someone wants to get something out to the Asian markets. But largely, they're just sitting idle. And so I was like, hey, I could schedule all my releases by default for next business day. And therefore, you could set them up overnight and it would cost you no additional labor. And I think that's what sort of, clinched the deal. And today, since then, all of our releases through eReleases go out nationally through PR Newswire. And rather than paying $1,600 to $2,000, it's like maybe a quarter of that or a third of that price. So it's a huge savings. We do represent a large number of clients because we're moving 10,000 to 12,000 releases a year. So combined, we are still sending a huge check to PR Newswire, but it is substantially cheaper than going directly to the wire.
This is a brilliant story, isn't it? Because it really is that you've learned the art and you've learned the trade and those skills from actually feeling it through and actually going through it yourself, which I always find is such a great way of doing it, because it's almost like you feel the pain on behalf of these businesses that you're now representing, because to get over the line there with that initial piece where you saw the data, but you then told the story around it. I mean, that is just, it's so powerful, isn't it? Do you think that's what kind of most businesses, when they try to do these things themselves, are really missing? They almost sort of kind of feel the ego of the story, be it a new product or a new service, and they feel like, oh, the world needs to know this, the world wants to know this, whereas actually the world doesn't care. And the same with the journalist. Is it about the storytelling that's way more important than the actual message behind it?
I think it's a combination of the two. I think that you want to have something strategic and meaningful, but I also think that you want to fulfill the elements that a journalist needs to sort of craft a story. For example, product launch press releases. We get those quite a bit. And I think that they're written from the standpoint of, we have a new product, we just want to sell more. So the press release looks like, here's the product and here's a list of features. And, again, going to a journalist who's a storyteller, there's not a lot of story to tell there. And so one of the things that you can do to take that release and make it more useful to a journalist is to incorporate data. So, if you have a product that is very critical to your industry, like maybe it's a huge cost savings, you could talk about, whatever the publicly available data says, like, 63% of people in your industry fail in the first 5 years because they just aren't profitable. And here's a logistics software solution that gets transportation companies into alignment with profitability. So you put the stakes there. So that makes it a little more important and anchored for an audience. But even more importantly, you didn't just introduce this product without testing it. You probably had beta testers. What was their experience? put a use case study in there. Like, hey, here's a company that was, losing 11% a year, largely because of their logistics cost. They used your solution, and at the end of the trial, they saw that they eked out a profit of 7%. And that's a meaningful number. Then get a quote by them saying, wow, we can't believe how easy it was to implement this and how we're able to stay on top of our cost and just be very efficient. And all of a sudden, that crafts more of a story for a journalist to write an article. And so, just coming to the understanding that what you want to accomplish, you also have to do that by giving the journalists what they want to accomplish, which is to tell a story through an article that either entertains or educates their audience, and ideally both. And so, if you can accomplish that, you make it very easy for a journalist to seriously consider writing that article about you.
Yeah, there's a word that you've just used there, Mickie, which is the word anchoring, which I'd like to go a little bit deeper into, because I think from a marketing perspective, we're often hearing, and I guess I'm using as well, the word hook, that we always want a hook with the message, be it the title of the email or, the promotional advertisement or something. We keep talking about hook, but I love the word you've used there about anchoring, because that feels as though it's a much deeper kind of experience for either the journalist and or then the reader, who's obviously at the next step of this particular process. Anchoring feels like it's kind of something that's really embedded in the listener or the reader. It feels more important than a hook, because a hook is just hooking somebody in, but it doesn't actually then land anywhere. Is this the right kind of definition of it, this word anchoring? Because it feels important.
Definitely. It's something where you're definitely embedding that number, that data to, to show the stakes, to make it meaningful. And, that makes it much more likely that the messaging is going to resonate, because all of a sudden people are realizing, what is at stake? What is the fundamentals behind this?
So then, if we've got that anchoring kind of statement, then if that's the kind of the first thing that we should almost be obsessing around as we're kind of crafting this kind of draft, if you like, that we're going to then be sending out. The story then that comes sort of beyond that, does it get written in the first person or in the third person? Because again, it's about personal, isn't it? Here we
Right.
kind of almost want to bring ourselves into the story, which is first person. But is there a better way of doing it?
So generally, press releases are written in the third person, but you can have quotes where you can cite stuff in first person. I say, tell the story as much as you can in third person, but then when you do the quote, really, really go for that human interest element. Really inject the empathy there. Generally, when you give a quote, it's an opportunity to stand out. And if you look online at any press release quotes, they often don't do that. They often are very safe. They look like they've been written by committee. And if a journalist was just to paraphrase what was in the quote, there'd be no loss. The article would probably be better for it. So that's the biggest test, I say, is if a journalist took your quote out and just paraphrased it, would there be a loss, an ache that, oh, I really missed that quote because it was so meaningful. It really touched me either emotionally, or it said something in a way that was so condensed and strong and powerfully that paraphrasing it was a loss. There's an ache of loss there. And so again, the quote is one of the I guess Trojan horses when it comes to a press release, because if a journalist is looking at two articles and they're of equal, importance or newsworthiness, and one has an amazing quote, the journalist can envision themselves writing the article around that quote and ending up with something that's just more meaningful and a stronger article. So they'll gravitate towards that. In addition to that, I've had people who've issued press releases about a subject matter, and the article gets written and they don't appear in it at all. It's like they brought this issue or this observation to the journalist, and the journalist just took them out of it. And a lot of people feel like, this is just something that the journalist did that was cruel, but that's unlikely what happened. What happened was the journalist certainly probably included the quote, and by including a quote, ensures a mention of you. And then the managing editor looked at it and said, why is this company mentioned here? I don't know them, and this quote is so weak, and they just cross it off. And so, one of the ways to stay within the article, especially if you're bringing something to attention that is, sort of an observation in the industry or something you've noticed, like a blind spot that people aren't talking about, and you're bringing it forward, is to make sure your quote is exceptional. Because if a managing editor sees a company they've never recognized, but it's an amazing quote, they'll probably circle it and put an exclamation mark next to it saying that's a phenomenal quote. And so that's one way to ensure that you don't get taken out of those types of press releases. And it really is usually not nefarious. It really is just a higher level of review, and you just didn't make it across the finish line. So really, really spend a lot of time on your headline and your quote. And the headline's so important because that's the way the newswire works. Someone will look at their industry feed. They can customize it by excluding certain press releases that maybe mention keywords that they're just not interested in that. But they're going to choose to drill down on a press release based on the headline. Does the headline resonate with their beat and their interest? Now, a lot of people mistake great headlines for consumers. If you've ever looked at the New York Post, they are known for funny puns, and there's no context usually in these puns, but it gets us to read further. That does not work with journalists. Journalists are under deadline. They're looking at their industry feed, and if it's not obvious from that headline that this is relevant to them, they're not going to drill down. They're not going to click through and read on. So remember, you're writing your headlines for a journalist, not an end user. And as a result, the headlines don't have to sing. They don't have to have puns. They really just have to be very condensed to get across what the important message is and making it clear that it's relevant to their industry and beat.
This is so useful, Mickie, really, for I guess all of us, me included, to kind of understand this process. Because I think for a lot of us, even if we've grown up in kind of marketing circles and we've done marketing communications for many years, that there are little nuances here in this kind of journalism, press, PR kind of field, which are very, very specific, almost unique to the industry, aren't there? These little subtleties that if you don't know it, you could keep on thinking, we've got it wrong. But once you know those little tricks, you kind of almost have a chance of getting in through the door. So, thank you so much for sharing kind of even just that little moment of process. So just building on what you've told us there then, Mickie, I mean, the idea here then is to be a little more bullish, is it, with the content? Because if a journalist then is going to be paraphrasing, let's say, to use your words, paraphrasing the next stage in the process of maybe creating an article or a bigger thought leadership piece of which you might be part, and that sounds exciting. But if you're not then bullish with that initial release that you're sending out, does that mean you're going to be so watered down by the time this thing gets to press that it actually is not even worth being included anyway? Do we have to almost raise the stakes of controversy, impact, the hard-hitting nature of our release to the journalist?
I don't think that it does. I think that at the end of the day, when people read articles, they recognize the style of the writers. They're comfortable with it. I think that at the end of the day, what we end up with as the finished product, the article, is never going to be like the writing on our landing page. Our marketing copy is never going to sell us the way we would want to be sold on pages that we control the writing. But here's the important thing, is that when you appear in an article, it is like a signal of trust. There is a huge credibility that happens, and often the conversions you get from the article greatly outweighs the conversions on your best landing page that you send paid traffic to. So that is important, because I think that the blinders that come up when you click on an ad and then go to a page that discusses you, people are really, they have their trust meters engaged, and they're really being protective, and they're looking at you with an emotional distance, and they're not, they're really looking for something to signal that they can just move on. But when they read an article about someone, they often have this emotional response or amplification that happens, this excitement, this rapport. And it's not unusual, if it's a B2C product and the price point's low, that they'll just click through or open a window and do a search for you, and then immediately just buy it. They often don't open another window to see if they can get something similar, cheaper elsewhere. They often, are very loyal, and, aren't going to price shop. They really are rooting for you, and they want to do business with you. I myself am guilty of this. Whenever I see a blog post or an article about a really cool Kickstarter campaign, I read about their journey. They discovered that this one little niche wasn't being fulfilled, and they really wanted this product, so they decided they were going to develop it. They talk about, their journey to get the product made, and all of a sudden, I'm clicking through. I see the price points under $50. I'm just like, okay, I'll support this person, even though half the time I don't really need that product. I want to support their effort. There's this entrepreneurial journey that I've invested in and I've been inspired by. And that's the real importance of earned media, which is what we call it when someone gets an article written about them. It's a huge credibility signal. It really gives you a lot of trust. And again, getting back to the importance of that story, the journey, your story is very important. And, that can often be either a primary focus in a press release, or even a secondary, where you talk about the announcement of the press release, like maybe it's a product launch, but then later in the release, you share your journey of what it was that caused you to create the business or the product. There's a reason that here in the US, everybody who appears on Shark Tank, which I think it's Lion's Den over there for you, they often open with their story, what it was that caused them to create the business. There was a setback. They lost a job and they had a hobby and they wondered if they could turn it into a business, or, they lost a loved one and, they thought this might be a way to honor them, or they decided that they want to set their own hours so they could be with their children at a young age. And, whatever it is, the reason that I think so many people open with that story is it immediately humanizes you. It gives you that human interest element, and it sort of injects this immediate empathy into the viewer, the audience. And that works in a press release as well. And it's one of the reasons that I think a lot of journalists pick that up and incorporate that as an element in an article that they write about.
So there's a lot of people listening to this that are going to be thinking, hey, there's a nice fit here, I think. And I'd love Mickie's take on this one, because the concept in marketing that I find myself talking about and listening to and kind of pondering a lot is this whole idea of thought leadership. Can I actually position myself in my market against my competition as a thought leader? It feels then that going this approach and really taking this seriously is going to hit both tactically in the short term, so actually driving business, as well as actually in the longer term supporting a thought leadership position. So is it about being really consistent, or can we do that as well as these short hits of product release, etc.? Does this kind of meet all of the needs that we have in small business, do you feel?
I think it can. I think that you have to sort of put the creative hat on, and sometimes, do press releases that aren't so obvious. One of them that I recommend in a class that I teach is for you to be the author of the data. I've talked about the importance of having numbers and data and incorporating them into a press release, but you could do a survey or study within your industry yourself. And by authoring a study, it really injects a lot of authority with you, positions you as an expert, and definitely supports you being a thought leader within the industry. And, whenever I say that, people get overwhelmed and think it's a huge undertaking, but it really is just finding a few meaningful questions to ask that would be relevant today for your industry, questions that people would want to know the answer to, and put together whether it's 8, 12, or 16 questions. I like using 4 questions per page in a product like SurveyMonkey. And that way, if they don't complete the whole thing, you've still got some of their responses. You can afford on the last page to put like a strange or left field question. Sometimes those can be fun or interesting. And then you take that link, you go to an independent or small trade association within your industry. You do want to avoid the big trade associations, the ones that are really well known. And as long as they have like 700 or more members, they're usually a good candidate. Ask them if they'd be willing to share that survey link with their members, and in exchange for that, as long as you get 100 or more responses, you'd be willing to incorporate them into the press release you'll be issuing over the wire. Most of the time, these smaller trade associations get no media attention. It's usually the large ones that do. The large ones have their own PR department. The smaller ones don't. So they will see this as a win-win, and probably more than 2/3 of the time, the first trade association we approach says yes. If they don't, you could either try to tailor the partnership a little bit differently, like maybe make them co-authors of the survey. They might be willing, or if not, you just move on. There's lots of trade associations in every industry. I had someone once telling me, well, Mickie, that wouldn't work for us because in the PR field, there's only the Public Relations Society of America. And I had to educate that person that there's over 470 PR trade associations in the United States alone. And she didn't realize it. And I said, the reason you don't know is because they don't get any attention, or they don't get a lot of love in the media. And so some of them are not going to be appropriate, like they're just particular to one state or one region. But there are other ones that have a good size, and they would be representative of your industry. And you then look at the results. Try to figure out, what was the biggest surprise of the survey? What is in a press release is going to be the most shocking and most interesting, data point that's going to excite the industry. And you're going to focus on that. You're going to put some analysis as to why you felt the numbers skewed that way. You're going to have an amazing quote by you. And then maybe you could have another mention of another a question, but generally the survey is going to focus on 1, maybe 2 questions at most. Build out the page on your website with all the questions and answers and link to it in your press release. What you'll find is some journalists will go through there, and maybe what really resonates with them is question 8 that you didn't even talk about, and they'll write an article about that. And again, you'll get the credit, and that might be an opportunity for a second release. Generally, everybody I coach through the survey method generally gets anywhere between 4 at the absolute least to as many as 14 articles just by doing that type of press release. And it really boils down to the most important element is just asking really interesting questions that are relevant right now at this time. Could be things that are trending in your industry. It could be things that are like, hey, we're post-pandemic. Are we still dealing with like culture issues, people not wanting to come back to the office? It could be, economic issues, like is money drying up in your industry? Just things that you can ask other people. If you were at a conference and you're like, ooh, I want to be around other people in my industry because I really want to ask them these questions that I'm experiencing and no one in the industry is talking about, those are ripe questions to be asking and to really get people's responses on. And again, this is something that you can do, and it sounds like it's overly complicated, but if you treat it like a process and move forward, it's very easy to do, and it's a great way to distinguish yourself as a thought leader in your industry and to get real articles written about you.
Yeah, is this kind of leading us seamlessly into a word that I know you're very passionate about, and you kind of, it is part of the training and the coaching, the mentoring that you do. This idea of hyper targeting. I know it's a word that I've seen you use on a number of different occasions, and it feels kind of really relevant here, that this is all about really thinking through target audience. And I know from any kind of marketing communications perspective, it is one of the starting points, but so few of us actually do it. Most of us kind of then start thinking about ourselves and what we want to say, rather than targeting, hyper targeting to personalize what the audience wants to hear. Is this coming into play here, this hyper targeting?
Absolutely. I mean, when you think about it, your industry is the most important industry that you want to serve. It's great to be in the Wall Street Journal. It's great to be in general publications, but the publications that probably matter most to many people are the publications that their potential customers read. And if you're at B2B, it's largely trade publications. If you're in B2C, it might be magazines or particular types of websites or influencers or people along those lines. So you really have to sort of figure out where is your customer and what is your customer reading, watching, viewing, and then trying to target that, because being a generalist doesn't work very well. I had one client who really hated the fact that looking at the golf trades on our website, there was just a few dozen, and they wanted to go to banking and business because the list was huge. And in their mind, their clients are bankers and business people. But I pointed out that the banking and business categories are financial analysts, people who report on banking and business. These are not people who write articles about golf clubs. And they sent it out because they're like, I'd rather reach 6,000 people than 23. And so they did that. Not much happened. And as a result, they later sent it out to the golfing industry. They got like 7 articles over it, sold $500,000 worth of golf clubs. And I was like, aha, you target the right audience and you move the needle. You go after a huge audience that's off target, nothing happens. And so that's the real importance with aligning your message with the perfect audience, because sometimes you don't need a huge amount of people. You just need the right people to see your message and to have that written into an article. And there is a human nature element where we want to make the biggest splash ever, but sometimes the smallest little splash can move the needle much more meaningfully than anything giant where you're trying to really just be a little bit off target or talk about yourself in a way that's so broad that it really doesn't really resonate.
So I guess what you're saying really then, Mickie, is that almost if we've got an influencer strategy, or if we've kind of dabbled with the idea of using, let's call them micro influencers, we're not talking about the big global influencers here, but micro influencers in my own industry, or in the sector that I'm looking to target. A journalist then who is really active, really well thought of actually within a particular sector, writing for those magazines or those trade journals, they become like an influencer for us, don't they then, by the way you're defining it?
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. At the end of the day, a journalist is trying to decide what is going to interest their audience, but they also are acting as curators, and they're trying to find unknown or little known tools, businesses, resources, and services. Journalists usually don't get accolades when they cover a well-known product in their industry. They have to, because it's a meaningful corporation. But often the ones that their audience gives them the most appreciation for is the unknown discoveries that they've put a spotlight on, and it really sort of cements them as curators. And as a result, it means that the smaller, more unknown businesses are more likely to get media attention and favorable media attention than big giant corporations. And that goes against what so many small businesses believe, that they think, I'm too small right now to really think about a PR campaign. I really couldn't move the needle when it comes to that because they're not going to resonate with me. But you would be surprised. It could be exactly just the opposite. And often for that reason, that you're very small. And as a result, the journalist knows that this is something that their audience hasn't been exposed to. And they're going to get a lot of really positive attention about bringing forth this discovery, this resource, this tool, this product that their audience in that industry isn't really aware of.
I mean, that gives us all hope, doesn't it? Really, it allows us to punch above our weight, to use a cliche that's been, often overused, but it's true here. By the sounds of things, is that if we are passionate about what we do, we've got some special messages. We can anchor those in the consciousness of the target, hyper-targeted journalists that we're looking for here. And as long as we're really clear, it's going to require us to spend a bit of positive, really kind of quality time reflecting on this, though, isn't it, really? Because it doesn't sound like this at all is about kind of mass communication. This is really focused and really cleverly, clearly thought through, isn't it? So is one of the early steps really just to take some quiet time, either individually or as a small team, if that's what you have, and actually just really think this through sensibly, because it feels like we shouldn't rush into this. It's got to be almost a strategically planned thing to get the best out of it.
Yes, absolutely. And to that aim, I do have a free masterclass that just focuses on these strategic types of releases that work. And it's completely free. And if anyone's interested, it's a great place to start. It's a less than an hour long video because I know that people don't watch 12-hour courses anymore. I know I sure don't. And it's available at eReleases.com/plan, PLAN. And I guarantee if you go through that, you'll have an education that probably outdoes many PR firms, because I get to see the 3% of press releases out there that are working, and there are patterns to them. And I see that when we take those patterns and apply them to another business, they work. And so these are the types of releases people should be focusing on. I've mentioned a few of them, like the survey and injecting data to really anchor a press release, and other things like having a powerful quote. But there's still several others in there. And I think it's a great place for anybody who's considering PR to start there. It is no secret that a lot of people say that press releases don't work. And I would agree that 97% of press releases do not generate earned media. They are the types of releases that aren't meaningful, or they've been written in a way that it's completely for the author. And, we have this product, here's a list of features, and it doesn't satisfy the needs of the journalist. And so I have really been an advocate for education and getting my clients to focus on the 3% of press releases that are meaningful, and to get them to be in the mindset of the journalist and trying to satisfy their need. And if you can do that, you can really generate a PR campaign of like 6 to 8 releases, in which maybe 3 or 4 of them get meaningful earned media. You're always going to have releases that don't work. Even great releases sometimes fail. But if you do several of them and you are trying different approaches, and they're all more strategic types of releases, you'll have probably more successes than failures. And when it comes to a huge success, it can be really be very meaningful for a business. Sometimes it's a huge influx of sales. Sometimes it's a huge influx of leads. Sometimes it's just a bit of authority that you've created in the industry, completely added to your reputation. And what you can do is take these links to these articles and share them with your own leads, and so that your leads will read those and get that same signal of trust, that rapport, and more likely convert as a result. Take that link and put it in front of your customers, and it will reduce your churn, because there's always customers who leave who say, I've had a good experience, but we should probably test someone else to make sure we're using the right company. They read that article, they're like, we're with the right company. We don't need to, shop around this year or consider using someone else. And also, take those articles, record them, put them on your website. It really does, give you a clout and currency that exists for a really long time. It's one of the reasons that startups in particular, often before they do paid advertising, will do PR campaigns and get a base of earned media, put the logos on their website, share the articles, and then as they start doing paid advertising and encountering leads, they put those articles in front of these people. It really makes the people feel like, wow, this is this is someone I really should consider working with. It really does build excitement and rapport and credibility, and it makes converting so much easier. And that is one of the powers of earned media, and it lasts for a really long time.
Great stuff. And I guess in this world of emerging technology, we've got robotics, we've got AI obviously coming through and trying to sort of dominate our attention. This pure human to human communication that's going to position our businesses and our brands appropriately going into the future just feels just so right, doesn't it, in this state of kind of business situation that most of us are in either side of the Atlantic. It almost doesn't really matter. It's kind of, this is the important stuff. And so it's so good, great to hear this. I mean, how is final question for you, Mickie? How is AI impacting, or is it not really impacting these kinds of relationships at the moment?
Well, I find that I've been able to use AI to help me write releases. It's good at helping to write a press release, especially if you feel like you're not a great writer. What it's not good at is coming up with the ideas for a meaningful press release, because you have to realize if 97% of the press releases out there are failures and AI is trained on everything, it's going to generate 97% of the time these press releases that aren't meaningful or strategic. So I approach it with, I've got my strategic idea, I've figured that out, and I go to it and say, how would you structure a press release on this subject? And then I approach it paragraph by paragraph and try to get the best paragraph out of it as I go. And I beat up AI. It's a machine. Do it. I will say, I don't like that third paragraph. Give me 7 versions of it that are different. And then I'll pick one. And then I'll say, oh, I like the third one you have here. But I'd like to mention XYZ. Please give me 3 versions that do that. And so I will say, give me, here's what I want to announce. Here's the press release I want you to write. Give me 10 headline versions, and then I'll pick one that I like and say, okay, I like this one. Now give me 10 versions of that headline. And I really beat it up. The one area that I find it's not very good at is the quote. So sometimes I have to get in there and punch it up and really make it strong and condense and really powerful. And but sometimes it can do it. But sometimes I feel like, me being the writer, it's easier for me to just write that. If you do it, I would just keep at it until you're satisfied. You want that quote to really stand out. But I think AI is a useful tool for writing a press release. At the end of the day, the press release is a tool for journalists. The journalist is going to write the article. And so I don't feel like there's a disconnect by using AI copy, because that's usually not the copy that's going to end up in an article. It will be syndicated on some websites, but they're all no follow links. And so to me, it doesn't feel bad, like using AI to write a blog post, which I personally would never do. I don't want content on my website to be AI written. That's just a preference that I have. I may be old school in that way, but I think a press release is completely appropriate. And if that's what you need to get a well-written press release, then go for it. But I do believe that I would never trust a press release idea that I got from AI, because I know that it's trained on the bulk of the releases that aren't meaningful and strategic. So I would always approach it with a strategic press release in mind.
That's great advice. And I think for a lot of us, it just provides that clarity. There's a huge opportunity here, but there's also some little tools and techniques that we need to make sure we're embedding in the practice when we come to rolling it out. So, Mickie, this has just been amazing. And I just want everybody to, if you feel this is part of a mix that can really help your business, check out eReleases.com. And obviously, Mickie's resources there, because there's a whole host of guidance, advice, and services on offer to you. So, Mickie, this has just been so valuable. And as a marketer of many, many years who's dipped his toe in the water occasionally with press and with media and with journalists, I actually have to say that over the last 40 odd minutes, I've probably learned more in this last 40 minutes than I have in that all that time combined. So I really thank you for, enabling me to kind of see the clarity of where we are right now. And I think for all of us, it's an essential thing to consider in our communications mix. So on behalf of everybody, thank you very much.
You're very welcome.